All right, welcome everyone. As previously mentioned, we're going to be going over the to-do list with user authentication, token-based authentication within Django. You can see my user model. We have a couple of API endpoints for requests that we need to make. And yeah, without wasting any time, let's go ahead and start creating this project. So I'm going to go ahead and run Python -m vmv.vnv. I'm going to go ahead and activate that virtual environment. All right, now that I've activated that virtual environment, I'm going to pip install --upgrade pip to make sure I have the latest version of pip. Then I can install Django. Django REST framework, because I know I'm going to need token authentication. I'm not going to worry about secret keys, but I am going to worry about speaking to my database. So let's go ahead and bring in cyclopg binary. Oh, I put installing instead of install. All right, so we have Django REST framework, and that should be everything I need now. Let's go ahead and start making our Django project. Okay, so there I made my to-do project. I have my manage.py. I know that I'm going to need to make a user app. I'm going to need a list app, a task app. Probably want to make sure I spelled that correctly. And a subtask app. All right, so now I have all of my apps necessary. Before I start making any migrations or anything, I do want to make sure that I go into my models here, or actually, I'm skipping too many steps. Let's go ahead and go into my project and start there. So within my project, I'm going to need to place my list app, my subtask app, task app, and my user app. Okay, I don't really need any of that. Oh, I definitely did forget some apps here though. I need REST framework. And I'm going to need REST framework dot auth token. All right. So that's as far as my settings in my installed apps go. Here in my directory, I'm going to need a database, which I'll just name ToDoDB. And I'll go ahead and create that database now. All right. Next, if I scroll down, I'm going to need an auth user model to be set to the user app dot use app user. That's what I'll name it. All right. And there's one more thing in my Django settings that I need to change that has to do with, oh, thank you so much, Nika. I also need to change my database engine, which I did not do. And I need to change it to PostgreSQL. All right. Now, there's one more thing that I'm missing to allow for token-based authentication. Can anyone tell me what that is? Go ahead, Tom.
You have to set like the REST framework equals a dictionary, and it's like you have to set that the default is token authentication.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and grab from Django REST framework. Let me actually bring up this window so I could use it for research purposes as I'm building this. And let's go down authentication. Here it is. So this is the part of that I need. I need my REST framework. I'm gonna go ahead and place it right under this. Oh, where's my list of dictionaries? Right here. And rather than allowing for session-based authentication, I'm going to need token-based authentication. All right, so there's my token authentication. There's my user app, user model. Looks like everything within my settings is set up now. I don't think I'm missing anything necessarily here. Let me check the chat. It seems like some people are sending a couple of messages. Okay, let's continue. Doesn't seem like there's anything on the chat. At this point, my settings are pretty set up. Let's go ahead and create my user model. Does anyone have any questions about setting up my project? Okay, let's go ahead and go to the user. So we move over to the user, go into the models. Again, from Django.contrib.auth.models, I want to import abstract user. And then from there, I'm going to make a class of app user. This app user will use the abstract user. And then I'm just going to make it kind of, well, I was going to make it simple, but it seems like we have a couple of things here. So we have email, age, display name, and address. All right. So let's go ahead and do email is equal to models at email field, which I'm assuming this will also be the username. So let's go ahead and make this unique is equal to true. The next thing I believe was age, and that seems like a positive integer field. Where I'm going to make it default. I'm probably not going to cover validators. I apologize, everyone. We don't have enough time. If we do have time to come back and add some validators, I definitely will. All right, and let's go ahead and go into display name. And let's make that models.char field. Let's make this a max length of maybe 50 characters. I think that's fair. Let's see, from Django for validators as V. And let's go ahead and make validators be equal to a list of V dot max value validator. And let's make this max value validator be 100. All right, I don't necessarily need a minimum value validator because I'm using a positive integer field, so it won't allow for anything less. Let's go ahead and do a min value validator for 18. All right, but I'm not going to make any custom ones. So there's that. And the last thing we need is going to be our address. So let's go ahead and do our address be equal to a models dot, and I think there's an address field. No, there's not. That would be really helpful if there was. So there's a models.text field. And then finally, I need a username field, which I can make equal to email. And then my required fields be equal to none. Let's see, if I'm going to make my required fields none, I can make my default here be unknown. I can make my default here be 18. And I'm just going to make my default for my address field also unknown. All right. So that should take care of everything as far as my user goes. I could definitely make a dunder method, but as we saw earlier, it will give me the username as a sort of dunder method by default. This is all I should need for my user. At this point, does anyone have any questions over how to build your user model?
I have a question. When you're setting it up, is there a reason for the way you title the class for like this example instead of it being like we usually do where it's like one word and they're capitalized?
Is there a reason why I'm choosing to name the class this way?
Yeah.
It's just my preference. I'm still utilizing snake casing and then capitalizing the first letter for the class. That's all.
Okay.
Edge.
Maybe I missed this. Is the reason for doing username field equals email? Are we just saying that the username is going to be the same as whatever email we input?
Yes, we're telling the program to utilize the email as the username. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Jens.
I know we're not going into making our own custom validators, but I noticed yesterday specifically for this abstract user that there were validators in place for the email and the default fields. If it's an abstract user and we are now making our custom fields here, can we put our validators back in where that exists?
Are you saying can we place validators inside of these fields here?
So how email, it has its own validator, I think, in the model, in the auth model. Can we just put it there for like, since we're making age and display name and address, can we just put our own validators in there instead of
We
making
can.
a separate validator? Okay,
Yes, we can add our own custom validators if we wanted to, and it would reflect within the user itself.
okay, thank you.
Of course. All right, so now that we have this information, everything's good for me to make my first migration. So let's go ahead and say Python -py, make migrations. I should see only one migration being created for my user model. And if I migrate, there should be a considerable amount of migrations to consider my authentication token, which I can see there at the bottom, and also my user app prior to my admin being ran due to dependency purposes. Okay, so that's done. I'm able to have a user. My application was able to execute migrations correctly, which tells me that my settings are working. Now I can go ahead and move into making my tasks information. I can see a couple of models here that have some common. So I see completed and name being a commonality between all three of them. I'm not going to follow this exact naming convention. So I'm going to go ahead and start at the list app, move over to models. I'm going to make a class of base template. I'm going to make this a models.model. And I'm going to give it a name, be a models.char field. And a completed field, be a models.boolean field. I'm going to make this default be equal to false. And I'm going to give it a class meta for abstract equals true. And I think that's correct. Let me see. Inheritable Django models. Let's see. Yep. So class abstract equals true. Awesome. So I will make this inheritable. So now I can make my class list, inherit from base template. And now that I inherit from base template, there's nothing else that I really need to do. So I guess I could just say pass, because I think that's everything for my list, right? Oh, nope, it needs a user. So I can say from user app dot models import app user. And then here I can say user is equal to a foreign key relationship. I apologize, everyone. I'm losing my syntax mind. All right, so here we go. App user. Now we can use an on delete method, saying that if the user is deleted, I want to models.cascade. And I could have a related name field saying that these are lists in relationship to the user. So there I made my base template that I can inherit from to list. So now list has name and the completed field, including the user. All right, so now I just made my list model. The next one I'm going to tackle is my task app. I'm going to go ahead and move into that model. I'm going to say from list app dot models, I would like to import the list model and the base template. Okay, now I'm going to make a class for task template, which is going to inherit from the base template. And I believe the only difference between those is that now I have a description field. So I'm going to go ahead and make a description, make that a models.text field. That gives me my template. Oh, I need to give this a class meta. So that it's inheritable. All right, and now I can go ahead and say class task inherit from the task template. And the only difference will be the connection, I believe. So now I need to make my foreign key relationship to the list. So I can say list. Ooh. Let's make that parent list is equal to models dot foreign key relationship to the list, where on delete the models will cascade and the related name will be tasks. All right, so that gives me all of the information that I need here. The final app or final thing that I need to cover is going to be my subtask app. I'll go ahead and go into the models. From there, I'm going to access my list app dot models and import my task. Oh, I must have named it something else. Oh, excuse me. I entered the list app rather than my task app. And then I need the task template. From there, I can say class subtask and take in a task template, with the only difference being that I need a connection to a task. And I'm going to make that a models dot foreign key relationship because it's a many-to-one to a task, where on delete the models will cascade and the related name will be subtasks. All right, and that is it as far as creating my four models. Does anyone have any questions over how I went through creating all of my models? I don't see any questions here on the chat. I do see something pointed out by DJ saying that the previous model task has a misspelling. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Natalie. You're muted, Natalie.
Sorry. Can you explain the class meta abstract equals true? Why do we need that?
Yeah, so when I make the class meta abstract equals to true, it's essentially saying that this is going to be a template and it is not to be created into the database unless it's utilized by a class that is not abstract. It's what turns it into an inheritable class so that I can actually place it into my database. So these fields won't be created into my database. There won't be a model or a table named task template. Django is just going to know that this is an inheritable class. Does that answer your question, Natalie?
Yeah, but you said, sorry, what did you say the abstract means exactly though?
So the app, like, what does it mean? It's essentially saying this is an inheritable class. Do not make an entry into the database.
And to sort of add on to that, I think we might have covered abstract classes a little, but not a lot. The idea of an abstract class is an object-oriented programming thing where like Francisco's saying, we don't want to directly use it, but we saw with inheritance, we can share stuff. So maybe this is sort of like our template where we're never going to use it directly, but we're going to use it to build other things. So for Django, we need to tell it that it is an abstract class. So it knows like, hey, never use this directly. It should always be used in some other model that then does all the stuff. If I don't know, Francisco, I hope that helps and doesn't make it more confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, just real quick. I noticed that subtask on the assignment page, it's supposed to have a parent task field. And I was just curious why we didn't add that.
My subtask, I think I've made it a task field. I can make it a parent task, but the difference is just syntactual. The actual model itself is being created with the many-to-many relationship. I'm just not naming it exactly what it is here on the image. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was confusing that for subtask name. I see. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So let's go ahead and run these migrations and see what it looks like within my database. I'm going to make migrations. I'm going to migrate. And now I'm going to go ahead and enter a separate terminal. And through PSQL, enter my to-do DB. Let's run select all from list. So there's my ID, name completed, and the user ID. Let's select all from task. So there we see ID, name, completed, the description, and the parent list ID. All right. Let's do select all from the subtask app. And we can see we have the ID, name, completed, its description, and the parent task ID. All right. Awesome. So everything worked great. I have all of my fields collected in there. If I run \D to see all of the different connections within my database, we can see that there was never a template created, or none of those templates were actually created into my database. Django is tracking them and just utilizing them as inheritable models. All right. Everything within my database is working. I've created all of my models. Now let's start making some views. So here I can see that it tells me API users, and it gives me a couple of naming conventions. Well, let's go ahead and start from the project. Let's go over to URLs, bring in include. And inside of include, we can see that there's nothing else. Right? We can go ahead and, I apologize, everyone. So now that we have include, we can go ahead and build our path here. Our path can bring in API/v1/users. And here we can include the user app.urls. All right. I can go ahead and go to the user app. Oh, not a new folder. Let's go ahead and make a new file. And then urls.py. And from here, from Django.urls, I can bring in path. Let's make some URL patterns here. And these URL patterns will have a path for, oh, hello. Sign up, which will then trigger the sign up view. And let's go ahead and import that. All right, so there's my sign up view. Everything's connected. I'll go to API/v1/users/signup, which is what we have here. It's supposed to return a 201 or a 400. So let's go into my views file and create this. So I know that I'm going to need a couple of things here from REST framework. I'm going to need to import API view. I'm going to import response. I'm going to need my model. And from REST framework, I will also need actually auth token.models. I'm also going to need token to be able to create a token. And from REST framework.status, I will need to import a series of HTTP status. So here's 200. I'm going to need 204. I'm also going to need 201. And finally, I'll need 400. All right. So there's all of my import statements. I could also get a get object or 404, but I don't need it right now, and I don't want to get it too confusing. Let's go ahead and create this view named class sign up. That's going to bring in from the API view. It's going to accept a post request. And then I can go ahead and create my data. So I'm going to go ahead and say data is equal to request.data.copy to copy from my data. I'm going to make a new entry for a username. And I'm going to make that request.data.get username. All right. Now that I have that, I can go ahead and try to create a new user. So I'm going to say new user is equal to app user ** data. I'm going to run my try block here. I'm going to say app user dot full clean. If app user dot full clean works, then I can go ahead and create a user. But before I do that, let's go ahead and no, I can create the user. Let's do that. Let's say app user dot save. And oh, I am using the incorrect reference here. Not following OP concepts. All right, so there you go. Now we have my new user full clean. Then I save it. And then to avoid the problem of the password, I'm going to utilize the set password portion to data.get password. That way I could hash it within my database. And I don't need to do the objects create. All right, then, oh, I need to raise an exception, which I forgot to bring in from Django. So I'm going to say from Django dot core dot exceptions import validation error. Nice. I'm surprised I remember that. So now I'm gonna go ahead and run except validation error as E. I'm going to print my validation errors and return a response of E.message with a status of HTTP 400 for bad request. And if it succeeds, then I will return a response of the user itself. No, I don't want to do that. Let's just do email. Let's see. I'm sure the README probably tells me exactly what I need to return. Let me figure that out real quick. Let's see. Create a user 200 receives all arguments and request body needed to successfully create a new user. Remember, email must be a unique identifier response with a newly generated user token. So it looks like the only requirement is the user token. So I'm just going to go ahead and say user and pass in the new user dot display name. And then I'm going to go ahead and pass in token with their token. And actually, speaking about tokens, I never created a token. So let's say token is equal to token dot objects dot create, where the user is the same as the new user. And now I can go ahead and pass back the token key. All right, so there's my user sign up class. I see a question here on the chat. It says in the sign up class for the post method, if request.data already had a username entry, why when we copy request.data to the var data, do we need to set the copies username field to the username from the original request? That's a good question, actually. So I guess what I could do is, oh, I apologize. This was a mistake here. What I was supposed to put is my email field to set it as a username, because that's what we want to utilize. I can see how that's confusing. But if they were to pass a username within the argument, I guess I could do something like request.data.get and then check if username is present. And if username is not present, then return the email as the default. Does that answer your question, Edge?
Yeah, it definitely does. Had I been more familiar with this, I may have been able to recognize that was a typo, but
No, that makes sense. Awesome.
I'm a fan because it's a perfect example of why asking questions is so important. This stuff is just too complicated.
All right, let me go ahead and put this endpoint to practice real quick. I'm gonna run my server, bring up Thunder client, and I'm gonna go to users /sign up. There I have my email and password, which should be the entirety of the required fields. And let me go ahead and send a post request there. I'm getting invalid token. I apologize, everyone. I was doing something last night and I have a little bit of code that's been left over. All right, so there you go. We can see that I got my user and didn't pass in a username, so it's giving me unknown. And there I have my token. So I'm going to go down here and place my token. All right. So now that view was able to work correctly. If I were to pass in something that is invalid within the body of my request. So let's say I never pass in an @ sign, or I'm missing an entire password, and I send a post method. That broke. Let's see what happened here. Validation object has no attribute message. Okay. So I believe in that case, let's see, what did I print into my server? Okay, so it looks like E will actually return the message itself. So let's do that. And let's send the request one more time. All right, there you go. So now we get the 400 bad requests with password. This field cannot be blank. Email saying enter a valid email address. All right, awesome. So that takes care of our first endpoint. Does anyone have any questions regarding how we created this first endpoint for being able to create a user and get back a token?
I do have another question.
Go ahead,
Can you
Edge.
go back? Can you go back to the view that we were just looking at?
Yeah.
Can you talk to why the token doesn't actually get saved with the user?
Why the token doesn't actually get saved?
Or maybe I'm just confused. In my head, I'm looking at new user.save on line 22, and then we make the token after the user's already been saved.
Yes. So the user needs to exist first before we can make this one-to-one relationship. If we remember, the token needs a one-to-one relationship in order to create something. So you can't create them at the same time. The user has to exist first, and then you can generate the token for it.
Gotcha. I was missing the fact that we created a foreign key relationship. I'm tracking it.
All right, go ahead, Karen.
Is the reason that we're generating a token for the user on sign up is because we're just assuming that after they sign up, they're automatically signing in?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, we totally forgot to log in the user. That's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it, Kara. I think you were trying to lead me right through the correct path by asking a question, which I appreciate. Let's go ahead and bring that in here. Let's oh, where is that at? I think it's in contrib.
I think it's contrib.auth. Yeah.
Import login. There it is. Log out and authenticate, which is all I need here. So what's login going to need? Login needs the request and the user. So let's do that. Okay, if this is successful, let's log in, said user, and it's going to take in the request and the new user. Awesome. All right, so now currently if I select all from my, whoa, all right, let's do select all from user. There should only be one entry. And we can see that that one entry, when I go here, we can see this last login field. It's a third field from the very beginning. Here's one field, two field, and then my last login is empty. That's because I never logged my user in using the login method. Well, now when I send my request, oh, I need to make a new user. All right, so now when I send my request, we can see that this user gets their own token. But if I run my select method, my second user has actually been logged in. So here we see the second user with their username of FR, and there's my timestamp for when my user last logged in. Thank you so much, Kara. All right. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say there's a question in Whiskey Questions.
Awesome. I see a question in Whiskey Questions. It says, didn't we set our username as the email? Is there a reason why we get unknown as a result? I do recognize we set that as our default. Yeah, so there's in our model, we set a default for display name, not username. And what I'm returning within my view is the display name, not the username. Does that answer your question, Adrian? All right, I'm gonna take that as a yes. Let's go ahead and move into the next portion of this README. So the next portion is going to be post API login. It's either going to return a 200 success or a 404. And actually, did I return a status? I did not. Let's fix that. HTTP 201 created. All right, so let's make our login view. So let's go to class. log in. Again, this is going to be an API view. Let's make the data be equal to request dot data. Oh, hello. I am all over the place. Self, comma, request dot copy. And now we can go ahead and save data. Well, pretty much the same thing as above here. Gonna go ahead and copy that. Recognizing some repeated code. So that means that I could probably make some sort of method or function that will clean this up and return a good data object. All right, so now I have this information. I'm able to grab the correct username, and now I can authenticate a user. So I can say user is equal to authenticate, where who was authenticate taken. Looks like it just needs the credentials. So let's say username and make that equal to data.get username. And now let's go ahead and move into password. And that will be data.get password. All right. So now we have that information. This should authenticate a user. I can go ahead and say if the user exists, I can go ahead and return said user. Or actually, I want to handle the token as well. I want to make sure that a token gets either created if they don't already have one, or that we grab one if they already have one made and they never deleted it from before. So let's go ahead and steal some of this code from up here. All right, so here we can see that the login is happening. We're going to pass in the user. We're going to have the user display name, but rather than objects.create, I want to get or create. And this is actually going to return a Boolean. So let's go ahead and make a second one there for created. All right, so if the user exists, it's going to log in my user. The token will be created. I will have the token. I can pass in the token key. And rather than 201, I can also pass 200. Okay. All right. If this doesn't work, I can then return a response of no user matching credentials. And then pass in a status of HTTP 400 bad request. All right. So now that I have this information, this should be working the way I want it to. I'm going to go ahead and move over to my URLs and make this endpoint. So let's say path, login. Bring in login. As a view. So there's my view, and my server should be running if I'm correct. All right, so my server is running. Let's go to login. This should be a post request. If I send it, I get no user matching this query. Interesting. I might have done something wrong. Let's see if fr@fr.com works. All right. So I keep getting no user matching these queries. That means this authenticate function may be missing something.
Do we? I don't think we have to activate the user. That's the one
No,
thought. Okay.
I'm gonna go ahead and print user here to see what's coming back. Data username. I am passing in the password. Go ahead, Kara. If you're talking, Kara, you're muted.
Sorry, it was just, I was trying to see where you're actually passing the password into the authenticate. Because it looks like you're just passing username through. But, oh wait, no, I see it now. It's just wrapped around.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
In your in the Thunder client, in the headers, is the authorization, I think, header turned back on with the token in it? Like
No. Yeah, it
Okay.
isn't checked off. Let's see. So that the authorization isn't getting passed in. I am passing the correct information here. So go ahead, Brian.
Just a shot in the dark, sir, but in the sign up view, there you might need to call save again after you set that password. Not positive, but not sure.
Interesting. Let's try it out. All right, let's try this out with a separate user. Let's change this to just that for now. Let's go ahead and sign up this user. Okay, so sign up is working correctly. And let's go ahead and log in said user. Okay, and login is working correctly. That's a good catch, Brian. I don't think I would
Yeah.
have up on that one. So set password needs to trigger a dot save afterwards. Awesome. Thank you.
We can probably drop the first save if we wanted to, though I'm not 100%, and since the code is working, we might as well roll on.
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on refactoring.
That's a good call, to be honest. I always struggle with that one.
Go ahead, Kara.
So since the we're generating a token on sign up, when you run login, is it just generating a new token and overwriting it?
When I
Like,
log
because you're
in,
not logging out to delete the token after, so
yeah, when I log in, it's not generating a new token. We're utilizing this get or create function. So essentially what this does is it looks within our database, tries to find a token that matches this query. If it exists, it returns that token. And if it doesn't exist, it creates the token.
okay. I guess the way I was understanding it in the curriculum was that generating, or you're adding the token to the, like how the token is applied to the user, I
Uh-huh.
guess.
How the sorry, could you extend that question a little bit more? Because
Yeah, sorry, I only half spoke that. I guess I was just I was understanding it differently. I think I just thought that the token was being generated on login and then deleted on login. But from what you're saying, it's being created on sign up and then it's just applied to the user on like the actual like header on login and then deleted from logout.
right, it gets deleted on logout. On login, you don't put it inside of the header. On login, what's going on here is this function tries to find a token. So select all from token where the user is equal to the user that I'm passing in down here. Right, so whatever user that is. And if it doesn't find one, then it runs a insert token for the values of user. And then it runs values and it gives it the user that I'm passing in. Right, so it's kind of like an if statement. So if that works, then it returns the selected token. If it doesn't work, then it returns a new token. Does that make sense, Kara?
I think so.
Okay, awesome. All right, so now that I have this information, I'm able to log in. Let me go ahead and take a look at my README. So that does take care of the login function. The next one that we're looking at is going to be our logout function. Okay, so let's do, I know that I'm going to need some permissions, so I'm going to make a token required class here. That's going to inherit from API view and have authentication classes equal to token authentication, which I currently do not have, which I'll need to import here shortly. And then I'm going to need permission classes for is authenticated. All right, let me go ahead and import both of those from REST framework right up here. All right, so there's my token authentication is authenticated. There's my class right there. And now I can go ahead and make my logout view. So I'm going to go ahead and say class logout is going to take in my token required view. And what it's going to do is it's going to delete the token. So it's going to take in a post method, self and request. I will grab the user from my request header. So let's do request.user.auth token.delete. And then the next thing that I need to do is I need to log out the user, which it looks like all it needs is the request. And then after that, I can return a response of status HTTP 204 no content. All right, so let's try it out. This is my user sending a login. So now let's say send a logout with a post method. I didn't make that URL, which might be helpful. We're going to make a path named logout. Let's run the logout as a view. Login will create the token. I'll address your question here shortly, Natalie. All right. So now I can send my post request. Authentication details were not provided. Interesting. Oh, that's right. Oh, this is a different user. Let me go ahead and go to login real quick. All right, so I send my request. Here is their token. I can paste the token now. And now I can go ahead and send this request to log out. We can see that we get a 204, no content. If I ping it with anything that doesn't have my headers, it will delete. Let's try to log in one more time. And before I do that, let's actually take a look what we have here. Let's run a select. And I guess what we want really is the login. Oh. Oh, it's there. Login does not exist. Yes, it does. I just looked at it. Oh, nope, it doesn't. All right, so there we can see our last login, which was a 754. I currently deleted my token and logged myself out. When I send this login request again, it will update it. It's giving me a invalid token, so that's good. Now, when I send it, I can see that I got a brand new token. It is not the same as before. I can go ahead and change that token, place it into my authorization headers. But if I run my SQL query one more time, we can see that it was now updated for my last login. All right, awesome. So now all of my information has been completed. I'm able to log in, log out, and generate a user. I'm gonna go ahead and pause here and answer a couple of questions. I'm seeing some things here in the chat. Excuse me, everyone. All right, so let's address a couple of questions here on the chat. So the login will create a token if there isn't one. Would it not make sense? So when I say login, I'm not referencing to the login function that's coming in from Django contrib. I'm referencing to the login view that we created. Does that make sense, Natalie? I think in your question there, you're referencing the login function, or maybe I'm just not fully understanding your question.
I guess I don't understand why, yeah, the login function. I don't get why that would go before grabbing the token, because I thought we need the token to log in.
No, we did not need the token to log in. So the token is completely separate from our user itself. They need the token to be able to authenticate. So it's up to us as the developers to provide them said token, but they do not intertwine, right? It's a way for them to provide us a authentication method for us to authenticate a user. We're not, they don't intertwine with one another. The user, in order to be able to track to be logged in, we have to use this login method. And this login method is what updates this entry within the database. Right? So if you ever have something where you want to check if a user has been logged out for a certain amount of time, and if the user has been logged out in that certain amount of time, you want to like send them a message or an email saying, hey, we miss you in the application. This login function here would be very important because you would want to consistently on a daily basis check who has not logged in the last 30 days and then send them an email. Does that answer your question, Natalie?
Yeah, kind of. Thank you.
And just to add to that, we have to, the user has to prove they're the user by giving us the password. And then once they've proved that to us, and that's all that login does, it says, let me take this password, hash it, compare it against like sort of the hash password in the database. Yes, like Adam has the password for his account. Okay, Django, we know Adam is who he says he is. Let's give him a token so they don't have to like log in on every request, and now they can be authenticated and do stuff.
I think that's the authenticate function that does that, Adam, not the login function, but I may be wrong.
Oh man,
you're right.
I think you are so right. I apologize. That is totally the authenticate function.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Yeah, just to kind of build on that, when you're testing login through Thunder Client, are you passing username, password through body, and you have to include that token in the header?
No, so the token does not become included in the header unless I'm using this token required. So the only one that actually includes the token in the header is the logout so far.
Okay, thank you.
And I see your question on the chat, Kara, where you're saying that what your understanding is essentially if there is a token that has been created for a user, then technically that user is logged in. That's not necessarily.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry, I just had a sort of built on that question. Like the way that I'm understanding as far as like your token required class, like basically you have a token after you've logged in, so you've been authenticated, so you're given an authentication token, and then you can then use that token required class wherever you want to like limit access to specifically the user. So like if you want to see the users like list, for example, you would use that token required prior to displaying that view, right?
Right, so that's correct. What you're saying is correct, and we're never going to run any logic saying, "Hey, is this person?" We're never going to run the login function again, or write some logic that says, "Hey, is this person logged in?" We're assuming that if they're passing that authentication token, we have logged them in already. But Django is not going to do that login for us whatsoever. Right? So in order for us to handle that login, we need to utilize the login function, but they are separate entities from one another. Does that make sense, Karen?
Right. So like when you log in, you're having them put in a username or an email and password, and then they're basically getting a ticket that is the token, and that's what they're gonna use to get to access all the other information, so that they don't have to go through that authentication at every step. It's like a
Right.
shortcut, basically.
Exactly. All right. I hope that cleared some things up. We have been going for about an hour now. This is a pretty big assessment. I am okay to continue pushing, but I want to check the status of the class. Would we rather take a good break or just keep pushing? All right, let's go ahead and take a break. Currently it's 10:02. Let's take 10 minutes and then come back at 10:12. Thank you so much, everyone. Go ahead and resume. All right. So far we have our sign up, log in, and log out methods built out. I'm returning the proper responses of each one of them. Let's go ahead and build that info method. It's going to take in that token required. And it's going to take a get method of self request. And I believe all I need to do is return a response. And in this response, all that it's going to return no, it doesn't have a get method. It seems like it only has a put method. Okay. This put method should update users' age, display name, and address if included in the request body. Only update password if the new password and old password are included in the request. Okay, this one might be a little complicated. Let's go ahead and tackle that real quick. So let's do put. All right, so I need to check or sorry, someone trying to say something? Display name, age, and address. I need to authenticate. Credentials. If credentials match the user, then I need to update password and save it. All right, so this should be pretty simple. Let's do request.user.displayName. And actually I need to make a copy of the data. And I'm gonna make that equal to data.get. I forgot that this is a method, so I need to call it. And what I'm going to get here is display name if it exists within the request. Otherwise, I'll return, and I'm just gonna simplify my life here. Let's say request user is equal to request.user. So let's do our user.displayName. This could be a lot easier if I had a serializer, but because I don't, and I'm gonna go ahead and do it the manual way. And then finally, I'm gonna do address. All right, so that should update those specific information, that specific information. The next thing I need to do is authenticate user. So then let's say our current password is equal to data.get password. we're gonna say if current password is in there, I'm going to authenticate my credentials. So I'll need to do auth user is equal to authenticate, where username is equal to our user dot username, and password is equal to current password. All right. So now I can say if auth user, so if it does exist, and it's also the same one as my current user from within the request, then I can say that the new user set, let's see, password and data.get, let's say new password would be the keys. And I'm going to set the password to data.get new password. All right. So I'm gonna check if the current password and a new password field are within the request. If they are within the request, I'm going to authenticate the user, ensure that the user being authenticated is the same one as the user that made the request. And then I'm going to set the password of that user to the new user. Okay, so that looks like that should work, and that should get done there. And now I could save it. So now I can say our user dot save and return a response of, I don't remember what the response should be. Let's see. It just says I should return a response. So let's just do I
think as long as we don't send back the new password, we're good to go.
yeah, I'm just gonna send back the updated fields. Let's go ahead and do display name. Let's do age. Go ahead, Kara.
The password should be hashed at this point though, right? So even if you were to pass it back, you'd get a hashed password.
I'm not sure if I do r.password. I'll check it out right now though, just so that we can do it for demonstrational purposes.
Hashing is also not the same as like encryption. It would depend what like algorithm was being used. So that's another reason to just, and plus you'd have to unhash it or unencrypt it on the other end to make it something visible that the user could see anyway.
Well, I guess I would want to also run the full clean method to ensure that this is working well. Go ahead, Edge.
Does full clean, is that essentially the same as is valid, just if you are not using a serializer?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, all right. I think this will do the trick. It's a big assumption, so let's go ahead and try this out. Okay, my server is running. This should go to users. My token authentication is now in place. I'm gonna go into the body. Password is in there. Let's add a new password field. And this new password, let's make it FA so that I don't forget it. And let's make display name Francisco. This should be a put request, and I think this should work. Let's check it out. 404, because I never connected it to my URLs. Okay, that's good. All right. So now if I send my request, all right, so it looks like it worked. I got my display, my age, and if I come back with password, it is hashed. I don't necessarily want to expose this on the database on the request, but it does come back hashed to answer your question. I think that was Kara that asked that question. All right. So now I should have a new password. So I can send a post method to log out. Okay, so logging out was successful. My password should now be this. I totally forgot what the email was for that user. And Command Z for the win. There you go. So fr@fr.com. This should be email. And my password should now be FA. So now if I go to log in and I send my post request, okay, that's good. That token doesn't work anymore. And there it is. It worked. I was able to update my password. All right. My put method worked to be able to update specific information and authenticate my user and set a new password. Does anyone have any questions regarding this information? What was that message in regards to, Adam? I apologize.
Which message?
See the ruser.save.
Oh, you already did it. You already saved it.
Oh, okay, perfect. Any other questions regarding this put method or this information that we've created? It's quite a bit, so I hope there are questions.
There was a question around .copy. Does it do anything extra in the background when we do request.data.copy other than making a copy of that data dictionary, sort of JSON dictionary thing for us?
Yeah, I believe all it does is actually create a dictionary out of it. When the request comes back, it comes back as a query dictionary or a requests order dictionary. It's not an actual dictionary structure until you utilize the .copy method as well. Not only that, but you don't want to just do data is equal to request.data, because at that point, you're not making a data of the copy, you're manipulating the original dictionary. So you want to create a brand new copy of that data so that you can actually manipulate it and keep your request data as the source of truth. Does that answer that question? Go ahead, David. You're muted if you're speaking, David.
Yeah, no, sorry, I opened something. Yeah, just a little bit hazy on. So when you're doing this put request, like historically we would have used a URL that had an ID in it. That way we could identify the user that we're updating, but with this it doesn't use that.
Yeah,
I guess that's coming through the body. Is that how we're doing that?
so we're not authenticating the user through their ID. We wouldn't want to expose their ID. They have their token, and through token authentication, we can grab the user through the request.user header. All right, so their token will come in. We'll utilize this authentication class of token authentication that will give the header a user, and then we can grab the user from the request headers. Does that answer your question, David?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Go ahead, Natalie.
So yesterday when we were doing the info view, I thought we could only do a GET request. So I guess if we are trying to change anything about a user, would we do it through the info view as well? Like how you change the password here?
Yeah, definitely. It's still just depending on your own OOP design. You could create a separate class if you would like to. But I could have technically done it through the logout view, right? But I want logout to just do specifically logout. Whereas my class info, well, it's the info that I'm updating, so that's where I could do my updating. The only reason why you can't use the ones above is because they're not utilizing this token required class, which is what actually gives me my request user. Both logout and info return the user into the request header through token authentication. But this class info is the only one that's supposed to manipulate the info regarding to my user or get the info regarding to my user. While logout's entire purpose is supposed to be to log out my user. Does that answer your question, Natalie?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Go ahead, Landon.
Could you go, I don't think you put it, or maybe you did, your URLs under your user app and your to-do project just to see you setting the API endpoint for that put request for the info?
Yeah, definitely. Starting from the projects. So here's my path to the URL patterns. I'm going to API v1/users, which I believe that's what the README required. Oh, I put a v1 for all of them, and it doesn't seem like that was part of the README. I apologize, everyone. So let me go ahead and go to my URLs and take off that v1. And it goes over to users. From there, it's going to go to my apps URLs because of that includes function. And since there's nothing following it, it's going to trigger my info view.
Okay. So if you do a put request in the Thunder client at that URL without specifying on the end of user, that's where the request is going for the updated password.
Right, that's where it gets routed to. Yes. Let me take off that v1 before I forget. Go ahead, Lewis.
If it's sorry, you yep.
Louis,
Potentially
Yeah,
you're breaking up there. Maybe can someone else in the classroom share the question, or if you can throw it in chat.
Steal someone else's monitor and talk through their camera.
go through Steven's right now. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, put in your ear.
You guys hear me okay? Sorry.
Yes, we could hear you now.
My bad. Yeah, so it might be slightly out of scope, so just let me know. But yesterday we talked a little bit about potentially cleaning up the views.py by adding a utilities.py. Was that I forget like what the fruit of that conversation actually led to. Was that just like a we could do it kind of thing, or like what do people typically use the utilities.py folder for or file for?
Yeah, definitely. So typically within your app, you'll see that there's a lot of repeated code that I have here, right? So one, I have something that grabs data. I could grab requests out of the data. So maybe I could create a function that will format my request for me and return a copy of data and the user already for me, rather than writing that over and over again. There could be a separate function that handles all of this information of being able to update independent fields. There could be a function that will update the password, right? Like both of those are independent functions. But I don't want to necessarily make class methods for them. So I would create a utilities.py inside of user app, and that's where all of my refactoring would go. where I would isolate and use single responsibility principle to isolate the behavior that's happening within this method. Does that answer your question, Luis?
It does, yeah. Sorry about all the struggle bus to ask that. Thank you.
Of course, no problem.
Thanks, man. Yep.
All right. So if there aren't any other questions, let's go ahead and move into our next view. And Luis, I think you still have your hand up from your previous question. But now we can move into list finally. So it looks like list, we could grab, well, there's no way to grab all list. That doesn't make sense. Oh, yes, there is. All right, so we can grab all list or create a list, and we can create CRUD applications for the list themselves. So let's go through that process. My user app is now complete. I can go over to my URLs inside of my projects and route them to my list app. And then I can include my list app.urls. I'm going to go ahead and make a urls.py. Same thing. I'm going to say from Django.urls, import path. I'm going to make some URL patterns. We're at an empty path. It's going to trigger the all list as view. And then I can go ahead and say from views, import all lists. All right, so that view doesn't exist yet. Let's go ahead and make it. I'm going to need to import quite a bit of stuff here. So let's say from user app dot views, I want to import token required. So I can grab that token required information. I'm going to need from REST framework, I'm going to need views. From REST framework, I will need response. And then from REST framework status, I am going to need, let me actually grab all the HTTP requests from before, so I don't have to manually type them out. So here's my user app, here's my views. Oh, that's too much. Let's copy that and let's bring that in. All right, so this should be almost everything I need. The last thing I need will be my model itself, which should just be list. Am I in the wrong app? Nope, I am in the right app. Interesting. What did I name? Oh, I was in the wrong views files. All right. From the models, import list. All right, well, now it appeared. It wasn't appearing before. I'm not sure where I was that it was causing that error. But now I got my token required, my API view, my response, my status codes, and I can go ahead and build my list. So let's go ahead and make my class all lists. Takes in my API view. Should take in two methods, which is get. And my post. This one might actually be easier if I make a serializer. So I'm going to go ahead and make a serializer here. Let's go ahead and say from .models import my list. And then from REST framework .serializers, I want to import model serializer. All right, so now I can say class list serializer is a model serializer. I don't need to have a connection to my my user. I don't need my user to be included inside of this response. I don't need to include that. But I do want my class meta to essentially have the model of list, and for the fields that are covered to be all. All right. And actually, I'm just going to exclude my user. All right. So that takes care of my serializer. I can go back to my views. And rather than bringing this in from models, I can say from .serializers, I want to import my list serializer, and I want to import list. Go ahead, Chris.
You had a typo on your serializer for exclude.
Oh, thank you. And then I can't remember if it's exclude or excludes. I guess we'll find out here shortly. All right, let's go ahead and grab our entire list. So let's say all list is equal to my list serializer. And what it will take in is list.objects.all. Actually, I'm going to sort them. All right, and then I'm going to return a response. And the response that I'm going to return here will be my all list dot data that will return a status of 200. I'm going to place this within a try and except block. Give me a second, Brian. All right, go ahead, Brian.
Sorry, I can't remember if the serializer will work based on the design without the many equals true there on line 17.
It will not. Thank you. I appreciate it. So let's do a many equals true because we're passing in a list. All right, so this should take care of our serializer here. Now, the next thing that we need to do is account for our post method, which here we can make a data copy. Then we can go ahead and utilize our serializer to make a list serializer where data will be equal to data. And then we can go ahead and say serializer list dot is valid. If it is, we want to return. Well, first we want to save. And then we want to return. Oh, well, I can't utilize excludes if I want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and just do fields is equal to all. I think that should work. Let's save it and let's return our serialize list dot data. It should all be within a response. And this should be a status of HTTP 201. Else, we should return a response of serializer list dot errors with a status of HTTP 400. Let's actually print these errors. All right, so let's go ahead and try this out. I'm gonna run my server real quick. My server is now running. My user has been logged in, or I think this was the last time I logged in my user. So I'm gonna go ahead and update that token. And actually, I'm just gonna send this request to the user for login again to confirm. All right, that is the same token. Good. I'm gonna run a get request. And this get request is gonna go over to lists. All right, we can see that list does not exist, and that's okay. Oh. There we go. So our list comes back as an empty list. Now let's go ahead and try to create a list. I'm gonna send a post request. And a list should be. Oh. Inside of this data. We should have the request.data ID. And I just realized I'm utilizing API view instead of token required. All right. Okay, let's make sure that get request still works. I send the request. I send a post. Good. We need a name and a completed. So let's go ahead and do name. Pass the assessment. And let's do a completed. False. All right, now when I send my request, it looks like that worked. My new list was now completed. If I run a get request, we can see that I have my list of one specific list. All right, so now I've made a list and I have my endpoint for viewing or for getting all or creating one entry. At this point, does anyone have any questions over what I just did so far of creating a get request for grabbing all lists within my database or creating a list within my database? Go ahead, Edge.
So with the current functionality that we've implemented, if you were to create a new user and then do a get request, would they still see that list? Or is there, within what we've created, is there a verification that says only show the lists that are associated to the logged in user?
Yeah, that's a great question. Currently, right now, we're just doing all of the list. And actually, that's a really, really good question because we're doing this incorrectly. I don't just want to grab this straight from my database. I want to grab them straight from the user. And let me make sure that that is my related field name there. If I go to my models, it is list. Okay, good. So now I'm going to go ahead and query requests.users.list, and it will only grab the list that belong to this one user. So now if I send my get request, it's still going to send me that one because it was created for that one user. But good catch. Thank you. I appreciate it, Edge.
Can you like make another user and just demo it not showing?
Yeah, definitely. Let's go ahead and send a post request. Let's go to users/sign up. And let's go into the body here. I should have just saved my body. Oh. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and send this request. Doesn't seem to. Oh.
Should be username, right?
All right, so there we go. Now I can go ahead and come back to my headers. place that as my authentication token. Send my request for getting over to list. And now I can see that it's empty. Awesome. Does that answer your question, Edge?
Yes, it does. Thank you for doing that.
Of course. All right. I'm not seeing many other questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on into the next portion of being able to update, delete, or grab a one specific list. So here I'm gonna go ahead and make a class, a list. Same thing, this is gonna be a token required. And this is going to take in a couple of methods. So it's going to take in get. It's going to take in put. And it's going to take in a delete. Going to start off with the delete. And actually all of these are also going to take in an ID. And I'm going to name this list ID. So I'm going to start off with the delete method. So I'm going to say, I'm going to utilize get object or 404. And then I'm going to say list. Is equal to get object or 404. The object that I want to query is from request.user.list. And what I wanted to match is where the ID is equal to list ID. All right, that should do the trick there. From there, I will delete said list and return a response with the status of HTTP 204 no content. All right, so this will either find one or throw an error. And actually, this is going to be pretty common. So I'm going to go ahead and make a get list method that's going to receive a request and a list ID along with self. And this is just going to return this subject. All right. So now I have a method that will get a list or throw a 404 error. If a list is returned, I'm going to delete it. The next one I'm going to go through is going to be my get method, which is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to go ahead and use my list serializer here. And what I'm going to serialize will be my get list method that will take in my requests and my list ID. And all I want to return is the data. This should all be within a response. And that response is going to return a status of 200. So there we can see a status of HTTP 200 open. All right. So that takes care of my get method. That's either going to return a 404 or a 200. And lastly, my put method. So I'm going to say current list is equal to self.get list. That's going to pass in the request and the list ID. From there, I can serialize this And I'm going to go ahead and say that this is going to use my list serializer, where the current object will be my current list. The data that I want to update this with will be request.data. And I'm going to pass in partial equals true. All right, from there, it's just a simple checking if the data is valid. I'm going to save said list and return a response of the serialized list.data with a 200. Else, I will return a response of serialized list.errors with a status of HTTP 400. All right. At this point, I've made my entire CRUD functionality for a list or all list. Does anyone have any questions regarding what we've done up to this point? Okay, I see a question here on the Zoom chat. Where you specified returning only list items for the current user, would you using a filter on say list objects.filter or have the same effect for your get request? You can definitely filter it if you would like to, where it could filter multiple parameters, but it's going to be a lot easier if you just grab it straight from that related name field. Does that answer your question, Landon?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Of course. I see a question from DJ. Is it better practice to specify the 200 response for readability? I'm not sure if it is better practice, but we definitely can. Let's go ahead and run the HTTP 200 okay there. And I think there's a couple of other places where I had it. Nope, that's it. Here it is. Awesome. Can you explain using request.users.list again? Yeah, definitely. So my token authentication is going to set a user to the request header. So now when I say request.user, I'm actually grabbing the user that's sending the request out of my database. And that user, if I look at my list model, I made a many-to-one relationship with the name of lists. So that means that my user model now has an imaginary field named list that's being managed through Django. Does that answer your question, Natalie?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a quick question. Could you just explain what partial equals true is doing in the serializer field?
Could I explain the partial equals true? Is that the question?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Adam, could you answer this question for me?
Say that one more time, Kara.
In the serializer field, he has a partial equals true. I was just curious what exactly it's doing again.
Yeah, exactly. So because we're using the serializer to say modify existing data, if we're only updating like one or two of those fields, but not all of them, partial basically tells the serializer to do that. If we don't set that, I think the serializer will throw some sort of error if only some of the fields are there. So we can like only update user or only update email or so on. Does that make sense and help answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, good question. Yeah, that is one of the nicest things about serializers is that partial equals true because it makes it so much smoother.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Adam, for stepping in there. So now that we have this information moving, we have a list, We have our quoting application. We still have a good amount of time, but let's actually go ahead and take 10 minutes now so that we could, actually, never mind. We'll continue on until 10 minutes prior to retro. So let's move on into our tasks, which looks like that's probably where we're going to have to stop, is within the task. So now that I have this information done, I can close all those models. I can move over to my, oh, I didn't even test it, did I? Okay, let's go ahead and create a list, because currently I'm sending a GET request. Let me run a post. And I think within the body, all I need is name. Again, I'm going to say pass the assessment. I'm going to send that post request. That's going to create one list. If I send a GET request, it should only return one, because that's the only one that belongs to this user. The next one that I'm going to go ahead and run is being able to manipulate specific, or being able to, being able to change the information within here. So now this gives me the ID of 2. If I run a GET request, I never plugged it into my URLs. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. All right, so now we send the request. I made a typo. All right, so let's send that request. So there you go. I get one specific ID back. Good. Let's go ahead and run a put request where I change the value of completed to true. Now we can see that true comes back. And then let's finally just delete this. And then we can see that it's deleted. If I run a GET request again, I get a 404. This does not exist. So now let's go ahead and bring back that name and create our list one more time. All right, so now our user has full CRUD capabilities for our list. Let's move on to the task app. So now within the task app, I could already see that I'm going to need 2 separate files. I'm going to need a serializers.py, and I'm going to need a urls.py. All right. So now how am I going to connect these? I only want users to be able to see tasks from the tasks that they've already selected. So it looks like what I need to do is go over to my list app, go into my URLs, and include from here. So now I can make a path for an integer list ID / tasks. And this will then include my task app.urls. All right, so I moved to my task app.urls. From Django.urls, I can import path, create my URL patterns, and I can make my path for an empty path named all tasks.as view. All right. From .views, I will import all tasks. I can move on to my views and start bringing everything in. I'm just going to go ahead and grab it from my previous views file. I don't necessarily see a reason for continuously rewriting it over and over again. So I'm going to go over to my previous views file, and I'm going to copy all of this information here. bring it back over to my views. And now I can go ahead and worry about serializers. So I'm going to say from REST framework dot serializers import model. Wow. Model serializer. And then from dot models, I can import my task. So now I can go ahead and say my class of task serializer will inherit from model serializer. It will have a class meta where the model will be task and the fields will be all. All right, so that's it for my task serializer. Now I can go ahead and go into my views. And within my views, I can go ahead and say from dot serializers, I want to import my task serializer. All right. Now I can make my class all tasks, pass in my token required, and then do a pass here. All right, so everything has been connected. I've imported all of my information and I've created a serializer. At this point, does anyone have any questions over how we connected this application, the linking between URL patterns, or what exactly the thought process is behind this? Okay, awesome. So now that we don't have any of this, now that we have all of this information, let's go ahead and start making our methods. So the first one is going to be a get, which will take in self, a request, and a list ID. Then we need to do a post that will take in self, request, and a list ID. So the first one I'm going to be handle is my list ID there. So I'm going to go ahead and say tasks is equal to task serializer. And then I'm going to grab everything from my request.user.list. Dot get. So will give me my list ID. And then I want all of my tasks. So I'll say dot tasks. And all I need to do is a many equals true. All right, so I'm going to iterate through the user. From the user, I'm going to grab its list. From the list connected to this user, I'm only going to grab the one list that matches the list ID. And then I want to grab all of the tasks that belong to said list. That's what's going on in that line there. So let me leave a comment here. Grab user from request, find its lists, and query by list ID to get one list and grab all tasks belonging to said list. All right. So now I have all of my tasks that are serialized. From there, I can return a response of my tasks dot data with a status of HTTP 200. Okay. I could wrap this in a try block, but to save time, I'm going to go ahead and move to my post method. In my post method, I'm going to go ahead and say that my data is equal to request.data.copy. From there, I'm going to grab one specific list. And I guess this could be a get object or 404 method here. So I'm going to go ahead and say users list is equal to get object or 404. And what I'm going to pass in is the request.user.list, where the ID is equal to the list ID. And now that I have that one list, I can go ahead and create my task. So I'm going to say data. And I believe the name in my model for the task was parent list. So I can make parent list an entry that will match the list ID. So the only reason why I'm doing this here is to ensure that this list actually exists and it belongs to the user. Now I have my list ID within my data. So now I can say new list is equal to, or excuse me, new task is equal to my task serializer, where data is equal to data. I can say if new task is valid, I want to save said task and return a response of new task dot data with a status of HTTP 201 created. Else, I want to return a response of of my new task dot errors with a status of HTTP 400 bad request. And I don't need that, so I could just do it this way. All right, so there's my get method and my post method for all of my tasks. And this is likely as far as we're going to get. Let's go ahead and put this into practice and make sure that it works. I'm going to go back to my URLs. My URLs are plugged in. I'm going to go over here to lists. I'm going to pass in the ID of 3 to get that one list and pass in tasks to get my list of tasks. It seems like we got a cannot unpack a non-iterable object, integer object. Interesting. I wonder where this error is being written. If I scoot over to the top, it's likely something. Yep, here it is. Go ahead, Brian.
Just a guess, but when you do the list.get list ID, if you put it like a PK equals list ID or ID equals list ID, I wonder if that'll fix it.
Yeah, that's definitely it. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and go over to our views and fix that information real quick. So we come over to our views. I done goofed and forgot to put in my argument in there. Now let's run this request one more time. We can see we get an empty list. The only parameter here should be named. So I'm just going to go ahead and put study. I'm going to send post as my request. I get 400 bad requests, so something happened. And it doesn't seem like I printed my message, but it should have returned within my errors. Okay, so it looks like my description is required. I didn't give it a null value, or I didn't give it a default value. So I'm going to pass in a description. I need to study for the assessment. And now when I send my post request, it should come back with a 201 OK. We can see that it comes back with the correct parent list ID, study, completed, and all of this information. All right, and that is how to create a post or get method regarding to all tasks within one user's list. And all of this is connected to one specific user because we're grabbing everything from request.user. Otherwise, it won't be able to find the information to ensure that users can't grab information from other users or alternate that information. I'm going to go ahead and stop here. Actually, one last thing that I would like to do is in my list app, I'm going to add that serializer. So I'm going to say from my task app dot serializers, I want to import my task serializer so that now I can say tasks is equal to my task serializer, many equals true. This way, when I go to ping one specific task, if I send my requests, my task will also be included within my individual list. All right. So we've seen quite a bit of information. Let's do a quick review over everything that we covered. And then after that, we'll open up the floor for questions. So today we created quite a bit of apps. We created the list app, the subtask app, the task app, and the user app. We started off with fixing our settings.py. In settings.py, we ensured that the correct apps were added into installed apps and accounted for REST framework and auth token inside of REST framework. We then went down to our database, changed our database engine to PostgreSQL from SQLite, and added a name to ToDoDB to ensure that it can talk to our database. We added this REST framework setting here, which will set a global token authentication, but will still allow for anonymous users. And then we establish an auth user model that a token can be related to. From there, we made migrations to allow the admin site. Oh, excuse me. From there, we went over to our user app and made our actual user model. Our app user has an email, age, display name, address with a username field referencing the email and no required fields other than the username and password. We then made migrations and migrated, which were successful. After that, we started off with our behavior on our user. We covered how to register a user without a serializer. We covered setting a password. We then moved on to how to log in a user utilizing the login method. Created a token. We also have the get or create function down for login so that we're not creating a new token every single time. Then we made this inheritable class named token required that will set authentication and permission classes that will be utilized for logout to be able to delete a token and use the logout function to log out the user. And then we made our our info class, which will be able to update the information of a user, their display name, their age, address, and password. We then run a full clean to make sure we have valid data and save said method. Once we tackled our user app, we moved on to our list app. Inside of our list app, we created the model for the list that had an abstract base template that could be inheritable into the class of list. From there, we went over to create our serializer. Our serializer was very simple. It just accounted for all fields. And then we moved into our views for creating the CRUD capabilities for getting all my list in reference to the one user that was sending the request, utilizing the token required inheritance. A user can then make a list as well, where the relationship will be to the user itself. We would then cover how to grab one specific list or return a 404 if that list doesn't exist. We went over updating this list or deleting that list. Finally, we moved over to our task app where we created our serializer for the task individually, accounting for all fields. We had our model, which we inherited the base template to create a new template named task template that will also account for the description field, and then created a task. with a many-to-one connection to the list. Finally, we went over to our views, made a get method for grabbing all of our tasks that belong to one list that belong to one user. And then we went over how to create a task for a specific list belonging to a user. Inside of our URL patterns, if we look at our project, this was a little bit different than what we are used to doing. We made one endpoint that will follow list. From that list endpoint, we go over to our URLs here. And our URLs, after identifying one specific list, we can also get all tasks belonging to that one list by including our task app URLs. Then we go over to our task app, move into our URL patterns, and identified all tasks belonging to an empty path. At this point, does anyone have any questions over anything that we covered today? I see a question from Kara. For the required fields, if we wanted to add additional fields beyond email and password, do we need to only include the additional fields within the required fields, example field, or do we need to add email and password, or as well, required fields? Got it. So for required fields, this isn't going to overwrite the parameters from before. If you go back over to our user app, and where did you go? Here we are. And we go over to our model. Here in the required fields, we do not need to reiterate username and password. We could just strictly add age and display name. And then by doing so, even though I have a default value, it will not create something unless I pass in a value. Does that answer your question, Kara?
Yeah, it does perfectly. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Any other questions regarding everything we covered today? This was definitely a lot of information. I hope that it was useful. I know that I went quite fast, and the reason behind it is because I'm trying to get as most of it in the recording as possible, so it's available for everyone during the weekend. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to message me on Slack, and I'll get you that information as soon as possible. Currently, it is 11:20. Let's go ahead and take an 11-minute break and come back for retro in 11 minutes. Thank you so much, everyone.